Irwandy, bagaimana prospek bisnis batu bara di tahun 2024 mengingat di tahun lalu Indonesia mencatatkan titik tertinggi produksi batu baranya. Namun di sisi lain permintaan batu bara secara global diperkirakan akan turun Pak pada 2026 nanti.
Kalau kita perhatikan bisnis batu bara pada tahun 2024 ini masih cukup menjanjikan. Ya, kita tahu bahwa realisasi produksi batu bara kita di tahun 2023 mencapai 775 juta ton dan target di tahun 2024 itu sekitar 710 juta ton dengan target domestic market obligation sekitar 181 juta ton. Jadi memang kalau kita lihat di sini ada beberapa hal yang harus kita perhatikan. Misalnya pelajaran dari Inggris, Cina, dan India, yaitu krisis energi global saat ini menunjukkan bahwa ketergantungan terhadap bahan bakar energi fosil antara lain batu bara masih tinggi. Proses transisi energi menuju ke net zero emission membutuhkan waktu di mana dominasi energi fosil akan digantikan oleh EBT tentunya. Tetapi kita lihat perkembangan yang terjadi di EBT di mana target tahun 2025 sekitar 23%, ini baru tercapai 23 atau 25%, baru tercapai sekitar 13%. Nah, meski telah ada upaya untuk memacu produksi energi terbarukan ini, penggunaan energi fosil antara lain batu bara tidak akan hilang dalam waktu dekat. Ya, jadi jika harga bahan baku bahar fosil berfluktuasi dan tinggi, maka ketersediaan cadangan bahan bakar fosil dan peningkatan diversifikasi sumber energi baru terbarukan sangat diperlukan serta secara bertahap akan mengurangi ketergantungan terhadap energi fosil. Dari dalam rangka mengantisipasi ancaman global terhadap batu bara, maka pemanfaatan batu bara ke depan harus memakai yang namanya clean coal technology, yang antara lain ada CCUS untuk mengurangi CO2 dan teknologi-teknologi batu bara bersih lainnya. Demikian perkembangan 2024 ini menurut kami kebutuhan akan batu bara masih tinggi.
Terima kasih Pak Irwandy. Maybe last question for Mr. Dileep. How do you assess the prospects of Indonesia's coal business in 2024? And given that in 2023 Indonesia recorded the highest coal production, but on the other hand, global coal demand is expected to decline in 2026.
Very difficult to comment on what will decline or not. That time will tell. But if you're looking at history, and if you're looking only at 2022 versus 2023, there is a reason why the Indonesian coal production was also higher. It is because after the pandemic, when the demand contracted, and as the economies in the world started picking up, the demand for power also went up. And the main contributor for that was Asia, and it was coal. So if you're looking globally at the seaborne traded coal, which is for exports by various countries, the coal demand for exported coal actually increased by a factor of about 7 or 8%. Now, what you're seeing in 2024 is possibly a stabilization of that. Now, whether China will import 310, 320 million tons that they did last year, we don't quite know. But what we do know is that when we are looking at the medium term, whether it is China, China is building up coal capacity. And it is said that they may build up coal capacity to make sure that they never have a stockout or a difficulty if renewables fail. So they want to have 80% to 100% protection through a fallback. And for them, the fallback is largely coal. And when I look at the India policy, the India policy also is getting into more and more coal-fired power plants over the medium term. And they're also encouraging higher production of coal, for which funding and financing is available. At the same time, in parallel, they are building up capacity for renewables. So they are actually protecting themselves from both angles. One is you have renewables for cleaner energy. And in the event that you have a problem with renewables, you always have a fallback. And that fallback is largely fossil fuels. And in fossil fuels, it is largely coal. And China, Indonesia, and India all have an abundant amount of coal. So we see Indonesia at 2060 on the energy transition route. India has made the statement that they want to do it by 2050. And when we are looking at China, China have not made any commitment. They have just said that they will go green and that they will invest in renewable capacity. At the same time, all these three economies that we are talking about, Indonesia, China, and India, all have very powerful and very strong growth plans. And when we have very strong growth plans, we definitely need power. And when we need power, we need stability of power and certainty and guarantee of power. So all the three countries, in my opinion, appear to be moving in a direction which is somewhat similar. So it's difficult to talk about 26, but I would think 26 should be higher than 24, and 25 should be higher than 24, and 26 should be higher than 25. By how much? Traditionally, it's been by 2 or 3%. But that is where I see it. And I think that Asia is going to drive the demand. South Africa has already started increasing their production of coal. They've had huge problems when they went renewables overnight. US, which had shrunk on coal, is actually increasing export supply. Russia, which had done an abundant amount of coal last year, is actually now contracting or is stable, is unlikely to increase capacity. And Australia, which had a problem with China, now has coal, but they are restricting their coal to about 200 million tons of exports per year. So it is really Indonesia on supply that's going to drive supply. And it is China, India, Indonesia, and Vietnam. These would be the four countries which are likely to drive the growth for coal in Asia. I don't see any letup in this, at least for the next 10 or 15 years. So I would think, as I said in my first statement, that the sector outlook for the medium term and maybe over the next 10, 15 years is actually quite buoyant. The only constraint that the sector really has at this point of time, I mean, while I've mentioned that it'll be helpful to have friendlier policies, I think the biggest challenge that the sector has is funding for new coal capacities. If banks are unwilling to fund. And if banks are unwilling to fund, there is a transition period of 20, 30 years where demand is going to go up with the growth factor in the three countries I mentioned. Demand will go up, but we may have a shortage of coal supply. And if we have a shortage of coal supply, then it is bound to have an upward pressure on price. So I feel that we need to look a little more realistically over the next 20, 30 years on how we see the scenario for fossil fuels. And that is what we are aiming to do. And as Irwandy has very, very pointed out very relevantly, which is clean coal, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and how we utilize that carbon that we take out and trap. Those are the technologies that we need to spend some money on research so we can make this kind of technology cheaper for us in Asia to use. Unfortunately, the renewables lobby has been rather strong over the last 10, 20 years. So even though IEA in the early 2000s had said that CCUS is the way to go for coal to prolong the life of coal, In 2010 onwards, unfortunately, this took a backseat. And
All
then
right,
the
thank you very
hysteria
much.
started.
Very well, Pak Dileep. Terima kasih sekali lagi kami ucapkan kepada